Have you ever wondered if your art making is quote unquote good enough? Have you created what you perceive to be ugly art? Are you a facilitator and you feel pressure to share and create work that's good enough? Welcome to Mindful Creative Muse's Q&A Tuesday. And today we'll be diving into this question around the relationship with our inner critic and creativity, both from a student's perspective as well as a facilitator's perspective. So I share creative and calming practices for self-care through online e-courses and retreats at mindfulcreativemuse.com. And I also share mindful art and yoga teacher trainings online. And so this Q&A call is from one of our group coaching sessions. So it is with some of my students in that teacher training program. And I think it's just such an important topic that comes up for so many of us, where inner critic chimes in as we're making artwork or as we're facilitating mindful art practices for others, or as we're facilitating and trying to connect with people in the world, this idea of, is our work good enough? And if you've ever started making artwork or creating a mindful art practice, and then you've noticed in your mind you being judgmental about what you're creating, perhaps you don't enjoy it, you might think that it's ugly or that it's just not coming out the way you would like. I think this is a really important question and something that we're going to dive into. And so I strongly encourage you to check this out, whether you are a student or someone just exploring your own creativity, or if you're a facilitator and you're feeling that pressure around your own work as you share and create with students. So let's just dive right in.
So welcome to the Q&A session for our group coaching call. So this question says, it talks about ugly art, and this person says, ugly art is on my mind. It's unpleasant to be in that place. And they say, although I feel like it could be related to this incubation period of the current COVID-19 crisis, sometimes it feels like as a facilitator, there is an expectation that everything you make should be quote unquote good. And I love this question because I feel like it touches on a couple of different aspects. That pressure as a facilitator of sort of being an expert and then showing this good work. And then also I feel like it taps into what's common for all of us, whether we're a teacher or a student, and that is the inner critic, which many of you know I speak about the inner critic all the time. I'm very passionate about it. And I'm so passionate about it because I feel like it's really prevalent, and it's especially noticeable when it comes to our creative practice. And Brene Brown talks about this in her research, and in her book, she talks about how what she found with her research is typically 80% of people that speak of having any sort of shame moments when they're younger, it's connected to a creative-based act. So I found that amazing when I read that in one of her books. 80% just seems so high. So this idea of, is what I'm making good enough? And is this creative work presentable, or does it look like it's put together? Does it look like it's worthy as a facilitator to be named as an expert? All of these different kind of thoughts kind of come up. So I first want to say, with mindful art especially, so much of the focus is on the process, not the final product. And I think that can be heard really frequently, and it's said so frequently that sometimes it starts to lose its meaning. It's like, oh, process, not the product, or, oh, trust the process. And it's a really simple statement, but I think that there's so much truth to that. And what that ultimately boils down to is whether you're a student exploring mindful art practices or creative practices, or as a facilitator, it's still the same, that there's not this expectation or pressure around what the final piece looks like or what the final artwork looks like. It really is about, how can you use this as a container to create and give yourself free expression? How can it be used, these exercises, as a mirror to reflect back where you are in this moment, to possibly help you de-stress? So as a facilitator, so I have a couple of thoughts around this question. As a facilitator, the main focus is just how are you holding space for your students, and how are you sharing these practices in a way where it's not confusing, or they understand what it is, the kind of path that you're going on together, and also still constantly giving that reassurance and permission for them to, if they want to go off the path, or if they want to sit and witness, they have all of these options as students with you. The other thing that came to mind when I read that question is social media. And when you're trying to market and share your work, I feel like that's where a lot more of that perceived pressure of the work has to look good comes up. And so if any of you are on like Instagram, I think is a great example of, it's a place where we're documenting and we're showing our artwork. A lot of artists are on there. A lot of teachers are on there. And with mindful art or expressive arts, it's very different than if you're an artist, like a gallery artist, sharing gallery pieces, or even if you're teaching. There's a lot of wonderful alcohol ink artists that are on Instagram, and they're selling their work, and then they teach online classes around how would you do that process. So it's very technical based. So in those instances, I think that there is a pressure for the facilitator. People are drawn to you because your work is beautiful, or because they want to emulate this practice that you have and put it up on their wall to then look at it. With mindful art, it kind of depends, I think, on what your intentions are with your business and what your offerings are. So if you are an artist, or if you're exploring art and you want a technical aspect to also be part of what you're sharing, so it's not just about the creative process, but if you want to show a technique that you're excited about and it is partially technical, then you would want to also show that you're technically proficient in whatever that you're sharing with that. So I think that that is a reasonable something to be aware of, that if you're wanting to also teach a certain technique, that you also show that in your work. But I do feel like that's very different from just showing mindful art intentions and processes. Because a lot of mindful art can look like scribbles and can look like, I do mindful art practices with my 10-year-old nephew all the time. And sometimes you can't tell the differences between the work, right? The final process. But it's so rich. And so I think that's just that, those are some of the things that came up for me when I read that question. I'd love to hear what's coming up for all of you when you think about pressure, if you feel that pressure as a facilitator, where that pressure might be coming from, because we can sort of chat about that as well. Because those are just some of the places my mind went with the question, but I know it's very different for everybody. So I'd love to give just a little space for us to chat about that. And you're welcome to either just wave your hand and unmute, or you can press the raise hand button as well.
Hi, it's me. Well, for one, I could say that I adore being creative. I am definitely not an artist. So and I'm surrounded by artists. My mother's an artist. My daughter's going into photography. I am really into a lot of creative processes, and I enjoy doing so many of them, which is one of the reasons that I was drawn to you in the first place, to be able to incorporate them in all of the other things that I do. What I do for a living is that I am a substance abuse counselor, so I try so hard to bring all of those practices to the job. So when I was thinking about incorporating this into something that would be something bigger, something that I would, online stuff came up for me, because I was immediately thinking, I would be a dime a dozen. There's a million people out there who are more creative and their work is beautiful, and how that would be something that would be, how do I attract somebody if my final product is not something that would be attractive to somebody else. And so the marketing thing came up for me a lot, I think, in terms of how would I translate that to somebody. So I definitely like what you're talking about. It makes a lot of sense to me, because I've been thinking a lot of the entire idea of the process when I've been working with my clients has been getting messy has been the fun part. Having it not look perfect has been what we've all had in common. That's actually been the enjoyable part, is the commonalities. That's what we've been finding enjoyable in as I've started it after the first part of the course, incorporating so much of it into my group process. So that's for me.
I love that you brought up the or diving in deeper to how do I make this translatable in a marketing sense, so people that are drawn to this work and to working with me specifically, that connection happens. So I'd love to come back to that and dive in deeper as a conversation as well, because I think that that's also really an important topic, especially these days as more and more people are moving into the online space. So I just want to highlight that you mentioned that, and I'd love to come back and talk a little more about that.
So I hope you found that interesting and that it can spark some inspiration for you regarding how to be kinder to yourself as you're making art, and also how to hold that seat as a teacher if you're facilitating. So I'm going to include in the description below some different journaling prompts that you can explore and play with, whether you're a student or a facilitator, as well as some other links for support if you're interested. And I will link out to Brene Brown as well, who I mentioned, that offers amazing work around the power of vulnerability. So we will be exploring these Q&A Tuesdays on the channel, and then the Q&A group coaching program through the Mindful Art and Yoga teacher training. If you are a facilitator and you're interested, we do that monthly. They are live calls. They're usually about an hour. They're also recorded as well, so you can have your specific questions answered and receive more support on your own journey. So I hope to see you again another time, and until then, be well.